I think if I had to pick one category of wool, it would be light neutrals because I could do anything with them then. As long as I had my dyes, I could change them into any color. I would still have textures. It would be the best of both worlds, right? So let me show you the white wools, white, light neutrals that I have in stock. Before we do that, let's take a look at what I do with these light neutrals. This is a collection of white neutrals before they were processed. After they were processed, they become much lighter, much more uniform, much easier to hook with. So for instance, this wool started out as that wool. This one can be very harsh and hard. This is very soft and very easy to use. Here's the two checkered wools, which are here and here. They would both show up here very harsh, where these are much more softened. So there is a process for doing this. It's basically a marrying process because this is the background. I absolutely love this. I originally developed it for children's artwork, so it would mimic the look of newsprint, but I've since used it for almost everything. So let's get started and I'll show you the light neutral wools that I currently have in stock. This first one is one of those wools that'll get lots of attention. You can use it as is in an animal. I've often used this for small primitive animal eyes. Yes, don't put a solid black wool in for an animal eye because the animal looks dead. This will give them life, but this only works for very small animals. It's a great overdye piece. There's a lot you can do with it. This one is an old time favorite. It was around for the longest time, disappeared for maybe a decade, and then luckily came back again. This hooks up beautifully as a background. It almost does this kind of thing all by itself. So it's a great one to use for a background or any place that you want to have a light neutral. This is a piece of wool that I often include in the Best Beige bundles. It is one that has sort of a golden cast to it. So if you're hooking light colored flowers, this would be good. It would also be good in fields. This would also be good in a background, but it does have that dark line, which tends to break up the background a little bit. So I tend to avoid it unless I'm including it in a Best Beige background and I'm cooking it. And that tends to soften it just enough. You can't go wrong with a houndstooth check, right? This would also be good for small or larger animal eyes. It's not a black though, it's a dark gray, but it would still give you the illusion of the eye with a little bit of a white highlight. So it's great from that point of view. This wool has a really unusual sort of a nubby little texture. And so it's not one of the ones that you could cut on a number 3, where most of my wools you can cut them quite small. This one you could not, but it has a great texture to it. You can do a hook with it anything you wanted to make this color. This would be good for, again, another dirt road if your dirt is this color. The dirt in our area doesn't tend to be quite as warm or as orange. It's a little bit more gray because we have a lot of limestone. But if this works in your area, then by all means go for it. This is a nice little wool. Look how well my hands sort of blend into it. I will often use this in flesh for a primitive piece. So I have something that I'm hooking a face, but it's not going to take a whole lot of shading. This is perfect for that. If I'm doing pastel flowers, this is a beautiful addition into pastel flowers. It's got a little bit of a herringbone weave, and you know I like those. Those always give you a softer, more interesting color than any other pattern in wool. My all-time favorite light neutral, W027. I hook snow with this. I hook white trim on houses with this. Anything that I want to look white, this is what I use. Here it is with a white index card. Clearly, it's not stark white. But in a primitive piece, this is as white as I need to get, and it does a really good job of that. Now, when we have a wool like this, they tend to remake it. They don't always remake it the same way. So W27N is the remake. It's supposed to be a substitute. In hooking, they're pretty much a mix. This one is a little bit more white than what the other one is. You can see it there. A little bit more stark. This is a little bit warmer. It just depends on what look you're going for, but not substantially different. You could easily substitute one for the other. This wool has been a long time favorite for backgrounds. You could hook light wood with it. Look how good that matches. This is great in a background. This is great in a background by itself. Although most of my backgrounds, quite frankly, tend to be mixed with quite a few wools. But this is one that I would definitely throw into the mix. Again, it's got a little bit of a herringbone weave to it, but just an all-over good, easy-to-use wool with a slight pattern to it. This is an unusual wool in that it is double-sided. It is much more gray than it is on the front. So if you're hooking, say, a light gray or even a white building, particularly one that's in the distance, this would do the job for you, because every time you hook a building, if you can see more than one side, you need 2 pieces of wool. So this would definitely give you exactly what you need for that building. And it's got just a great overall pattern to it. And I guess when you analyze it, it's kind of like a herringbone, not quite. But a wool that I use a lot of times. It's probably the only gray that I actually use. W38 is very versatile from the standpoint that every strip is going to be a different color, but they're all coordinated so you can use them together. You can use this to hook and shade a white flower, which can be very difficult. There's the light of your flower, there's the dark, or you could use that for the dark. It's up to you and how you want to do it. I do think that makes a better dark because it's duller. But there are other combinations that you can kind of put together from this wool. Again, because it's a stripe, if you cut it this way, you end up with kind of a solid. You end up with single loops of each of the colors, and it tends to blend it all into one. So if that's what you're looking for, then you cut it this way. I tend to cut my stripes with the stripe. One of my all-time favorite wools, W039. This one makes a wonderful background. I'll often give this to new rug hookers because all they have to do is buy a 1 yard piece of one wool. 1 yard is always your cheapest price point. And because every strip is going to look slightly different, it's going to look like they used 30 different wools. But they really haven't. They've only used one. The background's a little bit darker. It's not quite as light as some of the others. But this lives with so many colors and gives a really good look to any rug. This one is an oatmeal. Nothing fancy about it. It's as close, again, to a gray that I will use. It's got a little bit of a warmth to it. It's not a cool gray, like where my sweater is more of a purple or a blue gray. This is a little bit more of a warm gray, but this works really well as a base for overdying or for hooking anything that you want gray. I do recommend that you mix it with something though, because it's getting close to a solid, and it's going to be a little bit boring if you try to fill in a big area with just this. I love this wool. Look how pretty these diamonds are. Look at the colors in that. Now, as pretty as it is here, when it hooks, all this disappears. And all you end up with is the color. It basically appears in the hooking like a herringbone. So I will use this in animals, particularly the white areas of animals, and that will work really, really good. You could use it for house trim. You could use it, it's a little on the yellow side for snow, so I wouldn't necessarily use it for snow. Lost my train of thought. Anytime you have a pastel rug, this would be one of the pastels that you could use in that rug. You know how we had W27N? It's not labeled right. This is actually the N version of this. And you can see how it's got a similar pattern. It's just not quite the same as the original. And that's what usually happens. The original ones are almost always better than the remakes. But this by itself is a good wool. It's a little on the gray side. Again, it's a warmer gray, but you can use it wherever you're going to use those colors. You could use this for house trim. You a little more likely to use this for snow, particularly the shadow, depending if you have something to go with it, like that W27 that I showed before. This one has a real unusual weave to it. When I have someone who's hooking sheep, this is one of the first ones I go to. I really like how this one adds that little bit of extra texture to it without being hard to hook with wool. Sometimes when you get a wool that adds a lot of texture, it also becomes thick and bumpy, or thick and thin, and it's a little harder to hook. This does none of that. It's nice and flat, but yet it's got lots of visual texture. So this is a great one for that. I'm going to show this side. W48 on this one. I call this one, for lack of anything better, I call this curtain wool. Because this is actually the wool that the curtains in my living room are made of. And I love this wool. It's got a nice look to it. It's got like a gray, or is it a blue line? Doesn't show up very much. It's very, very subdued, but it's got that little bit of texture going on, so it's not a solid color. Okay, so remember that other one that we just looked at that I said could be faces? So could this one, particularly if you've got children playing in the sun and there's a little bit more of a sunburn going on. It's a little bit rosier. You could use this for the cheek areas, but it's a beautiful pastel color. So if you're hooking a rug that has some dull pastels, this is one that will get you a long way. This is a great white, and this was the white that I was sort of banking on before they remade W27, which I now call W27N. But it's basically a white. This would be good for snow. It's still got a little bit of interest in it. It's not as boring as a solid. Much more interesting than any solid would. A little bit of penny dyeing. I'll put a link down in the show notes. A little bit of penny dyeing, and you would have the perfect shadows on your snow. Here's a little herringbone. This one is definitely more on the yellow and gray side. And you could use that wherever you're going to do this color. If you've got a pale yellow house that you want to hook, this would be perfect for the pale yellow, because it's going to be hard to find the right color for a pale yellow house. This would be wonderful. A little bit of penny dyeing to get you the darker side so that you have two values that you need for buildings, and you would be good to go. W54, I think this one's called confetti, and I think you can see why. It's got little pieces of color in it. Now, don't expect all those little pieces of color to show up when you get it hooked. A lot of those are going to disappear, but you'll still have little flecks of color, and you'll have this underlying tone that changes underneath it, so it's still better than a solid white. A little bit on the yellow side. I wouldn't use it for snow, but anytime you have something that you want to be white, this would be a good candidate. This is a fun checker. This is one that would be great as an overdye. You could overdye this any color you want. I love to overdye grays for that matter. I don't use many grays directly in the rug because I find them incredibly difficult to use in a rug. But if you're going to use a gray, this would be one of the grays that you could use, because it's not going to be a hard gray line. It's going to vary, and it's going to blend in with whatever else you have hooked. This is one of those, this will always be beautiful kind of a wool. If you wanted to tone down the white part of this wool, you could marry it. I'll have instructions or a link to some instructions in the show notes. And that would darken the white spot and make it more like a solid, but it's still not going to be a solid unless you cook it too long. But I love how this texture works and gives you interest in just about anything you want to hook. This could be anything, particularly if you married it and lightened up or darkened up that little white spot. It could be a building, it could be a light roof, it could be mixed with other things into tree bark, it could be a dirt road. This one's very versatile, and it's a good candidate for overdyeing. You can put dye on this and change it into any color you like. So that is my light neutrals or white collection. It's the second largest category in my studio. The biggest one are going to be the dark neutrals, and those will be coming up later. If you want to order any of these wools, you simply go to cindygayrughooking.com. Click on shop, then click on wool, and then click the big button that says buy any wool not listed on the website. Because I don't go to the trouble of listing all this on the website, because they often sell out very quickly. So you can check the inventory sheet on that order page, and it is current up to the very minute. Because if I go into my phone and make a change right here, within minutes, it's going to show up on the website. So it's automatic, so you know that when you order it, you'll know exactly what I have in stock. So that's it for today. Look forward to next week. I'll be doing another wool offering. I think there's 2 more left. So that's it for now, and I'll see you all next Friday. And did you know that you can watch other videos? But I'd also love to invite you to my live hook-in. I hope you'll join me.